All right, grade 9, here we are with our third lesson of this unit, Evidence for Evolution Part 2. So here is your template for today. We're only going through 3 pieces of evidence, so you need to have space to do breeding evidence here, fossil evidence here, and then genetic evidence here. One image for each one, and you'll have a choice of images to draw for some of them anyway. So take a minute, pause the video, and draw your template. Okay, so let's start by talking about breeding evidence. So for a long time, for many, many thousands of years, humans have been breeding plants and animal species to create specific individuals that have traits that we want. So we're looking for individual plants or animals that have maybe in a plant like a bigger fruit, or a certain kind of vegetable here, something that's going to be more useful for us, or perhaps even just more physically appealing. Sometimes we've been breeding things so we think they look prettier, we want them to look more often they look with that particular trait. Maybe it's really colorful feathers in a species of bird. People keep as pets, they want to have more offspring that have those colorful feathers, they can have more of them to keep as pets. Or maybe it's a dog like this, a bull terrier, where 100 years changed from this to this, and someone was looking for this kind of curved shaped skull. They thought it was really interesting, and they were breeding for that particular trait in this really kind of robust thorax area, whereas here was a little bit more narrow. Okay, so it's been happening for a long time. So how this works is people choose which parents that they want to breed, the parents who have traits that they want. So to get from this dog to this dog, they would have had to choose some parents who maybe had a slightly rounder snout than the other individuals in that population, and then pick 2 parents who are like that and then breed them. And over multiple generations, you're slowly going to get a more and more rounding kind of a snout of a bull terrier to what you have today. In plants here, if we had a one wild mustard plant, has been bred to make all these different kinds of vegetables. So cauliflower, they took the flowers and bred them for the sterile flowers, and that gave us cauliflower over many generations. If we suppress flowers, we end up getting broccoli again over many generations. We want the length of the stem to be shorter and not have as tall stems, we're going to get cabbage. If we want to have really big leaves, that leads us to kale. And if we want to have the side-to-side growth getting more and more pronounced, that's going to lead to kohlrabi. So different kind of vegetables produced by selecting for individuals of the original ancestor wild mustard that had certain traits. Either a really big sterile flower, maybe it has a really short or non-existent stem, it has really big leaves. They pick a trait they want and they will breed it with other ones that have that trait, or just plant the seeds of the plant that they wanted, that had the traits they liked best, and the seeds of the plants whose traits they didn't like, and they just would not plant at all and would give them a chance to grow. So Darwin knew about this. This happened but long before Darwin and during his time. Actually, a common hobby for rich and middle class people in Darwin's time was called pigeon fancying. I'll show you that next. As he would breed pigeons to have very specific kind of feather patterns and traits that they found to be particularly attractive. So why is this evidence for evolution? How does these changes in species over time, how does that provide evidence for evolution? Pause the video, think a little bit. Okay, so the reason why this provides evidence is because it's proving that species can change significantly over time. So we went from this wild mustard to a cabbage over multiple generations, and this happens much quicker when you're breeding than if it's happening naturally, because the selection pressure is very strong. You're either allowing that plant to breed or not, but it's very clear that we can change things over time. And we're very familiar with this from breeding dogs, horses, pigeons, all these different varieties of things, as well as plants. So here are some examples of pigeon fancying, and this is, as I said earlier, a really common hobby for middle class and wealthy people in Darwin's time. And if you look here, we have pigeons that have these curly kind of feathers. We have pigeons big kind of ruff in the front and this distinctive kind of tail feather pattern. We have pigeons that have these like really big, showy, feathery feet and these kind of feathery feathers. These feathers that have little like fluffy kind of outposts off them. That's a very big tail. And this big rounded kind of just a narrow head. That's a very distinctive pattern. And these were all bred artificially. So people were choosing which pigeons had the curliest feathers and breeding them with other pigeons with curly feathers to try and get this as the end result. That's called pigeon fancying, and Darwin did it as among as many other people at his time period. It's good evidence for evolution. Okay, so that is the breeding evidence. Take a minute and make sure your notes are filled out with what's on the slides and what I'm saying as well. Okay, if you need to go back and rewind to listen to it again, go ahead and do that. Okay, let's talk about fossil evidence. So another kind of evidence that Darwin looked at and other naturalists as well during his time, including his grandfather looked at, were fossils. And these are fossils of species that have been extinct for a long time. And remember the term extinct, what does that mean? Think about it for a second. So extinct means that species can no longer be found anywhere on Earth. It is completely gone from this planet. So by looking at bones and by looking at teeth, which are often preserved much better than the entire body, they can identify patterns between extinct and extant species. So if extinct species are those that are completely gone, extant species are the opposite, species that still can be found on Earth. And if we look here, here is a modern horse, and they look at the molar, the back kind of grinding tooth of the modern horse, and its front leg and foot. And then look at fossils from all these other horse ancestors. And you can see the foot here and the molar changing over millions of years. Okay, now this fossil record isn't complete. We don't have all the intermediate species for every single species that exists on Earth today. We do have it for a few of them, including horses and whales, and we're able to analyze those ones as further evidence for evolution. Okay, we're also able to figure out how old those fossils are. So with carbon dating, we can analyze the decay of carbon in the bones or in the teeth and figure out an age for that fossil. And that helps us better understand how quickly evolution happens. So take a minute and think about how does this provide evidence for evolution? Pause the video and think about that. So hopefully you thought about the fact that it's showing that these small changes over time, if you look here, down here, I have the pterodactyl limb, and it's being modified more and more as things go on. As the horse has this really strong kind of hoof and a very big muscular leg to help with running on hard surfaces. The original horse had little, or like its ancestor, not really a horse, had little kind of fingers, and the tooth is getting larger and larger over time, but you can see it's a gradual change. And these gradual changes are what Darwin was noticing and what natural selection kind of explains. The time frame is also really key here because if you remember during Darwin's time period, most people in Europe were Christians, and they believed that the earth was about 3,000 years old and that God created everything as it was today. So the fact that we can know this happened over a very long time with all these ancient fossils helps understand that this happens very slowly. Especially in larger organisms with longer lifespans, we can't see these changes happening, but they are happening over time. So you're going to draw something like this into your notebook, please. Okay, here's another example. If you'd rather draw this one, you can draw this one too. So we have whale evolution. So here is a humpback whale with our little pelvic bone here we talked about last class. And we have these ancestors of the whale. So here is a terrestrial ancestor. Notice how the mouth, snout kind of shape is very similar. And then we have a predominantly aquatic ancestor that could also go on the land, it was mostly aquatic. And then we have fully aquatic that had a pelvis bone and a little tiny hind limb there that's not really using anymore, it's lost its legs. And then we end up here with the actual whale. Okay, this is not a humpback whale, this is a whale ancestor that is still actually a whale, so it's much more recent compared to the previous ones which were dinosaurs. You can also look at the skulls. Skulls are really interesting ways to look at them as well. So here is an extant species, the Amazonian dolphin, and you can focus here on the nostrils. They're way back at the top of its head between its eyes, and that's very common. If you've ever seen a whale or a dolphin in the wild or in an aquarium, you'll see how they breathe their blowhole at the top, on the back of their body, so they don't have to surface complete to get air. Whereas other organisms, like here we have an ancestor from a long time ago, it had nostrils at the front. and then slowly began to move back because these species was terrestrial. It didn't have to worry about breathing above water because it lived on the land. So again, this progression of changes in ancestors in skeletons gives us evidence for evolution and how organisms are adapted to their environment. Okay, the last kind of evidence for today is genetic evidence. So this is one of the most important types of evidence for evolution. It's really comprehensive. There's a ton of examples of it, and it's very reliable. So it's not relying on humans' interpretation, looking for patterns in bones or embryos or fins. We're looking at actual numbers of how many genes are the same. So Darwin, of course, did not have access to this information, right? He didn't know about DNA. They didn't know how things were passed down. He knew there was some connection between parent and offspring, but he didn't know what it was. So long after his death, we discovered DNA and began to start understanding how it could be sequenced even longer after it was its discovery. So when we have organisms that have a similar DNA sequence, we know that means they have a really recent common ancestor. So humans and chimpanzees, we have 98% of the same DNA. That means only 2% of my DNA and your DNA is different from that of a chimpanzee. Now, that doesn't mean we evolved from chimpanzees. What that means is we have a recent common ancestor. And common ancestor is an important term to keep straight in this unit. That's telling you what we had, an ancestor that existed in the past, and then from there branched off to form chimps and to form humans over time. We'll look at a diagram of that kind of thing next. Okay, a very common type of or group of genes to be analyzed between different species, we're looking at genetic evidence for evolution, are called Hox genes, H-O-X. And Hox genes are genes that tell an embryo how to organize itself. So where the head is, where's the butt, where are the legs, how many of them are there, that kind of thing. So in this example here that you can choose to draw, or again you can draw the next one, we have here a crustacean that has many, many limbs, okay, type of ancestor, about 400 million years ago, and the Hox genes here were there for all these different limbs. The red part here showing the different things were coded for by the Hox gene. And then that over time led to insects today, which all have 6 legs, which are also coded for by the Hox gene. So notice here, we have a head, we have a rear, and the middle has segments and has legs. We have a head, we have a rear, and we have a middle, which has legs. So only 6, and here it has many, many legs. But that's a piece of evidence for evolution. So how is this evidence for evolution? Take a minute and pause the video and think about it. How is genetic evidence tell us that evolution is true? Okay, so hopefully you were thinking about the fact that by showing this commonality between species, we can see who has a common ancestor with who. And we can better understand the changes that have happened and the fact that organisms change over time. From this to this, from this ancient crustacean to this one, to the insect today, they're changing quite a bit over time, and we're able to see the similarities because they had a common ancestor. So here's something really interesting that we learned from genetic evidence. So if we think about elephants, so when we looked at fossil evidence and only fossil evidence of elephants, this is the kind of family tree how it was organized. Okay, the red line is for African elephants and the blue line are for Eurasian elephants. So we have the African savanna elephant and the African forest elephant. Okay, it's being 2 closely related. They're down here at the bottom of the tree is a common ancestor. And then up here, we're going to have the first elephant here and the second. These are much more closely related because they have a close branch. So at this point was a common ancestor between this elephant and this elephant. Now looking at the fossils and the patterns, we say, okay, the next branch here was starting from African lineage and then it moved to Asia. We have the Asian elephant and then we have the mammoth branching off. We might also have a straight tusked elephant coming off here, or it could be an ancient one kind of branching off down here. We're not really sure based on the fossils alone. But then we looked at the DNA and sequenced all this DNA and learned about the relationships. We found a very different pattern. So we still have the African savanna elephant as the one directly from a common ancestor. And then branching off from that, we had a branch that led to the African forest elephant and then the straight tusked elephant. So these two are more closely related to each other than we previously thought. Okay, we used to think these two were most closely related, but really these two are much closer. And we know this from the DNA. We also know a branch came off here much earlier, which led to the Asian elephant and the mammoth. Okay, and then that eventually led to this dwarf elephant of Sicily, which is a mix. And here, these think it just came off from this one straight tusked elephant. So the idea is genetic evidence can help us unravel patterns that we didn't really understand without it, things that we thought from just using our judgment of patterns of skeletal, of fossil evidence, of anatomical evidence that weren't quite right. DNA helps us to figure that out. Okay, so your next task, that's the end of the lesson for today, so make sure your notes are complete. You have an image for each type of evidence that helps you understand and remember. You have 3 more stations to analyze, and again, I encourage you to work with somebody else. So the breeding evidence, we're going to have you guys look at corn and how corn has evolved over time, as well as dogs. So there's a little bit of background information about each one here, and then only 2 questions to answer, but these are longer questions, so I expect longer answers. Okay, 3 or 4 sentences each. Then we have fossil evidence. So here we have a bunch of teeth of different lemurs in this family here, and we have 3 questions to answer about them. And then we have genetic evidence. So here's an image, I'm sorry it's not very clear, but of these boxes represent different Hox genes. And here's a further image of Hox genes as well between a fly embryo and a mouse as well, mouse and fly. So there's 4 questions to answer for this one. Okay, so your homework is to answer the questions for each station, and take pictures of your notes, and put all those things up onto the post, and this will be onto this Schoology post, and this will be due by the end of the day, Wednesday. Okay, so you have, because we're having a new lesson on Thursday and Friday, it's a 4-lesson week this week. Okay, so this is due by 3:30 on Wednesday, April 1st. Okay, have a good day, guys, and I hope you're staying home, staying safe, and not going too stir crazy.